At this point, I've talked a lot about my family, including how we had difficult living situations, how the household went through a divorce, how we moved 3 times in almost 15 years, the changes that our families have gone through, and the personal connections that I have with many of my relatives. However, up to this point, I've been neglecting to talk about the family household that I've been living in for a very long time, and I did that mostly because I wanted it to be its own video, but also because I had so many other relatives I wanted to talk about, and by the time I finished talking about my other relatives, the video had already had a very long length. So, as hard and painful as it may be, it's time I talked about those that I've been living with. My mother, my sister, my stepdad, and my birth father. I've mentioned before how I'm able to recall memories of long ago at any random instant, but it's really hard for me to think about what it must have been like when I was about 1 day old to 2 years old because people don't really start to think at those ages. Early life with my family was highly fair. It wasn't the best, but it wasn't the worst either. Everyone seemed to get along, and from what I remember, there wasn't a lot of dysfunction at the time. We were still living in that apartment, and as far as I remember, I really loved spending time with my family as much as I did watching cartoons and playing video games at the time. I remember there was a time when I actually went outside and did outside activity with them. I still remember the time I reenacted the entire Very Hungry Caterpillar story after drawing the whole thing out in chalk in our yard. I was doing it on all the tiles of cement that were leading up to our house, and at one point Miranda accidentally bumped into me with the wagon. It was a really, really fun time. We didn't do as much of it when we were in our apartment because we didn't really have much of a yard. But when we moved to our first house, that's when we really got acquainted with outdoor stuff. But I don't want to go too far ahead. I was in my very early years, and I was always having such a blast. For the not so much room that we had in our apartment, I always found ways of getting around and really messing with my mom and dad. We still have family photos of when we were first living there, and all those pictures of me playing with my mom, sleeping alongside my dad. It was a really nice time. Of course, I eventually had a little sister. Her name was Miranda. At first, I didn't really know what to make of it, because at the time I was still very little, very young, and I didn't have a lot of understanding about how childbirth works. I believe I was jealous at the time because everyone was paying attention to Miranda instead of me. But hey, I'm pretty sure that a lot of young siblings have gone through that, and I eventually got over that. Because we lived in the Chicago area, our family was a lot closer. They visited us a lot more often, and we had several more get togethers than we do now. They would come over to the apartment to do stuff. Sometimes we'd go outside and have a party or something, especially on our birthdays and Christmas. And we always just really enjoyed each other's company. We would play games, we would watch movies, we would sleep together, and when we fell asleep, Mom would always sing this wonderful lullaby. I still remember it after all these years. It's dark outside, it's night time. We go to sleep until the sun comes up. It's dark outside. It's night time. We go to sleep until the sun comes up. It was always the sweetest thing that Mom did that with us every night. There were all sorts of parks in the Chicago area in the state of Illinois, and I'm gonna take a wild guess that my dad has taken me to all of them. And because they had different designs, we had to think of different ways to name them. And we always went with colors primarily, like the red park, the yellow park, the blue park, the red park. And we always played together, me, Miranda, and Dad, when he got a chance off of work. He would chase us all over the place like a game of tag. We had to get away from him because he was the guy chasing us. And there was this little pole or this little tunnel that acted as the safe spot, and we beat him every single time. And the time with my dad, it was also a lot more pleasant. Like, I think my first word I ever uttered was when he was taking me on a walk. We were just going down the street on the sidewalk, and then I heard this noise up in the sky. It was an airplane, and we both looked up, and I said, airplane. That was literally my first word. Dad always loved talking about that story the first time I ever said that word. And we couldn't do this kind of stuff anymore because obviously I got taller and heavier. But when I was littler, when he could carry me in his arms, we always went to this school that was right next to our apartment. It was around the same block. We always had a nice walk over there. We saw some kids playing around. And because I was so influential at the time, I recalled a lot of famous cartoon characters and superheroes that I would pretend to be as I walked up onto the, what's it called? It was these wide stone handways that were alongside the stairs to the front of the school. I would always stand at the top, and Dad would ask, "Who am I?" And then I would shout, "I'm Batman! I'm the Power Ranger! I'm the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle!" And as I pretended to be that character, I jumped off the ledge and right into his arms. We did that almost every single day when I was a kid, and out of all the things that I used to do with my dad, that is what I missed the most. I missed when I used to be a superhero, jumping into his arms. Miranda, when she was littler, was always so chaotic and hard to control, but it was never out of bad intention. Like, she was a little kid growing up, and she would roughhouse, and sometimes she would cry, and there were a lot of instances where she would bust my stuff and break some things. And at the time, I admit I was highly annoyed by it, but looking back now, she was still growing up, and I can't really blame her for, still being in that naive mindset. We also did a lot of crazy things, especially after we moved into our new house. We used to slide off the side of the bed where we would land on the soft and safe to land on carpet. We would pretend to play golf with our plastic golf balls and miniature golf club set. There was also this seesaw that we had, and we always played with it in the grass, because in the center of this wide yard there was this diamond stone or whatever. Uh, oh my god, I wonder what that place looks like now. We always played on that seesaw going up and down, and something that we always did out of fun was that when one of us got to the bottom and the other side was all the way up to the top, um, we would say ready, and then the person sitting at the bottom would get off, and we would just flop down. We would drop down to the grass, and I don't know. I'm pretty sure it was painful, but there was something about it that we just really loved doing. And we also did a couple of other things together. We looked up into the clouds and tried to piece together what they were shaped like. We searched for Easter eggs. We would catch fireflies and lightning bugs during the summer. Even playing tag around the house. All of the things that we could have possibly done to have fun in that setting. The things that a brother and sister are supposed to do. Man, it was just so great, even during the first several years that we were living at that small house that was the size of a basement. Another thing that we would usually do when Dad was off of work is we would walk around the corner and we would usually go to this little shop and we would occasionally come back with a piece of candy or something like that. We did bike riding in the school that was near our house. That's where I got into the bike accident that busted my teeth. Back when Buddy and Bubba were still alive, my Uncle Bob's first two dogs, we would also go to the park near their house with Dad, and we would walk them around. And Mom, I always just really cared about my mother. I think for some reason, I don't know why, every single night I would just sit next to her and give her a hug. At somehow I learned about how jail is supposed to be a bad place, and while she would watch television, I would give her a hug and I would say, "Mommy, I don't want you to go to jail." I did that every single night for some reason for I don't know how long. I really cared about Mom that much. And I really get this warm feeling inside whenever I think back to that. I don't know how to describe it with just one word. It was meaningful. My relationship with Mom when I was growing up was very, very meaningful. I think a lot of my relationship with Mom, Dad, and Miranda at the time was highly meaningful because we just really, really, really enjoyed ourselves so much. It was great. And as I got older, I started to notice things happening between Mom and Dad. They started getting into these very heated arguments. I don't necessarily remember what it is that they were yelling about. It would elevate to screaming, and it just got so intense. And it really made me feel uncomfortable that Mom and Dad were constantly screaming. Sometimes it would make me cry because I really didn't like how the two of them weren't getting along and it was affecting the environment of our household. I'm not exactly sure when it happened, but at some point, the arguments and fights were starting to get physical. I would hear pushing and shoving and someone's body being pressed against the wall very violently. It was just getting so out of hand, I don't know how it was starting. It just kept happening for the next several years until one day the two were just screaming at each other to get out. And Mom said, "You get out," and like that, Dad was outside of the house, and he didn't come back inside. And after he didn't come back inside, I eventually learned that he just left. He didn't come back, he didn't call us or anything, he just left. And that's when he just left. The official divorce didn't happen for another 6 years. Like, Miranda was 11 years old, and I had to have been 14 when it finally happened. I don't exactly know why it took that long, but you know what? Divorce doesn't matter. Once Dad stopped living with us, that's when it just felt official to me. At least now. Dad just left us and he stopped living in the house because of all of these fights that he was getting into with Mom. And I always wanted to know exactly, why did they start fighting? Why did they start to hate each other so much? Apparently, it was because of me. I was born different from most children, and I was always different growing up. First time I learned about that, I was being sat down by my mom, and she finally talked to me about things that were happening between her and Dad. She actually brought my attention to things that I didn't even remember growing up. He didn't treat Mom very well, he was always getting in arguments with her, and he also didn't treat me very well, he was always yelling and screaming at me. Apparently, he never liked how I was different from other people, and he never wanted to understand how it worked. He just preferred to be with Miranda over me to the point that he was practically babying her, and he was trying to make it look like there was something wrong with me, and there clearly never was. He didn't want to go to counseling, and he didn't want to improve the situation he was having with Mom. He just kept blaming Mom for so many things that were happening at the time, and it was completely unjustified. He was also antisocial, and because of that, he was telling lies about Mom just because he didn't want to go somewhere whenever the family was invited. He would continue to lie about Mom saying that she didn't want to go. And after the divorce, Mom learned that Dad was telling his family that she doesn't like Mexicans, which is basically the same thing as saying that she's racist. People in Dad's family didn't like my mom very much for a while because of all of those things he said out of spite. He was a jerk to my mother, and he was incredibly irresponsible to me as a father, and yet it wasn't until later years until I started to figure out that, well, we'll get to that later. And so, in the years that Mom and Dad split up and he just stopped living with us, a lot of dysfunction started happening in the family between me, Miranda, and Mom. We started getting into arguments, we started yelling at each other, we started crying over trivial stuff. Miranda would do something to bother me, I would do something to upset her without even knowing what it was. It just got so dysfunctional and ridiculous. And it was like that for a very long time, because things only got harder with the divorce. It became harder for us to provide for ourselves and stuff like that. And then, one day, Mom said that she was hanging out with this guy named Robert. And because he called himself Bob, I decided to nickname him SpongeBob for some odd reason. I actually enjoyed doing that for a while. In fact, every time his family had a get together and I was able to go to it, I had a nickname for everyone in the family based on, the SpongeBob characters. There was Patrick, his brother, and there was Squidward, his other brother. There's Sandy, his sister, I think. There was this one woman I nicknamed Mrs. Puff because she was working at a school. I have no idea why I did that. I eventually grew out of it because it started to grate on everyone, and I kind of started figuring that, it ran its course, it's just getting old, so just move on from it. And for the first several years, it was actually really great. I mean, we started doing outings, and because he started hanging out with us more, he started helping us out with our living situation. We saw movies, we went on vacations. Robert's brother Steve owns this cabin up in Wisconsin. We try to go to it once every year, and it's always so much fun just being out in the Wisconsin wilderness, in those trees, in the woods, just relaxing as we watched TV and did some fishing. His family would actually have an outing up there like once a year or so. So the whole family comes together and we bring treats. There's cupcakes, there's a cake, there's these cookies, there's all of these sweets and snacks, and there was this whole step family that I got to interact with. Step aunts, uncles, cousins, nieces, nephews, and grandparents. We always had a really nice time when we were up there. Sometimes we would even see his family on Thanksgiving when Uncle Nicky stopped hosting it. And it just feels like a traditional Thanksgiving. Like there's this big feast with the entire family, like about a couple dozen people. There's somehow just enough food for everybody there, and I always get enough to eat. We say grace, and after we finish eating, we do a couple of other things like watch football or play some games in the basement. It was fun. I even learned that I had some step siblings because Robert himself was part of a divorced family. And one day he came home with his son, Josh. And Josh, he was just the best. He was always doing goofy things. He was always sticking up for me whenever Miranda started having a problem with me. We played games together. We told jokes together. He always did something to make me laugh, brighten up my day whenever I got home from school and stuff like that. It was just so much fun having him around. And since then, it was just the five of us. And after it was the five of us, we moved to this other house where there was more room for all of our things. And for the house that we got, it was actually pretty good, even though I already talked about that. There were a lot of moments where we would get into fits and arguments and stuff like that, but on the whole, it just really felt like this family was getting better after the damage that was caused by Dad. Yeah, it was all really cool. And after I started going to high school, uh, some trouble started happening between Josh and Mom and Robert. Before I met him, he was a juvenile delinquent who got expelled from school because he pulled the fire alarm. I don't know, I guess he just thought it was funny, I guess. He was being dishonest with them. A lot of bad stuff started happening that I really don't want to go into. There was arguing, there was fighting between the three of them, and it was just so distracting from all of the good things that we had been doing for the last several months. Apparently, it got so bad, it got to the point that Josh just wanted to go back to Texas. He just decided to go there, and he never came back. He just left and went back to Texas with his mother and sisters. It just came across as a real shock to me that despite that Josh was doing so many things to make me happy and brighten me up, he was getting into so much trouble with Miranda and Mom and Robert to the point where he just wanted to leave all of it behind. And it really hit Bob hard. And apparently it was only going to get worse for him because his mother passed away. Grandma Johnson. I knew Grandma Johnson pretty well myself, so I was pretty saddened about what happened. Yeah, it was not a really good time for any of us. It turns out that her house was left to Bob in her will or something, but he also wanted to make sure that we would have a fresh start before going there, so he sold our house that we were presently going to without any consult from Mom. And because of that, he is presently the owner of this house, and Mom has absolutely no benefits to it, which you think he would have considered considering all of the good stuff that we had been doing together up to that point. And in the years that we started living in Bob's mother's house, all of that great stuff just slowed down completely. We didn't participate in Bob's family's get-togethers anymore. We haven't had time to make plans for a vacation. And as time went on, it just got so horribly dysfunctioned. Mom got into arguments with Bob, Miranda got into arguments with Mom, Bob would get angry at Miranda, Mom would lose her temper and get angry at everyone in the house. We hardly spend any time together now. Bob is always falling asleep as soon as he gets home from work, and with Miranda occupied with her school and her job and her social life with her friends, it's usually just me and Mom. And because things grew to be so dysfunctional, it got to the point that Mom just spends her time doing touchscreen stuff, like on Facebook and Candy Crush Saga. And as for me, well, you already know that. I usually just keep to myself in my room, browsing on the internet, playing a game, listening to music, watching something on Netflix. And sometimes when I'm by myself, I just have all of these random memories of how horrible my household has been for so long. I can't remember all of it, but I do remember a huge number of very, very bad experiences. And knowing how dysfunctional this family ended up becoming to be, it just makes the whole thing worse. I don't know what the hell happened or what caused it. It's as if as time went on, we started to hate each other. At first I was having some nice times with my mom, my dad, and my sister, and now I live in a completely dysfunctional household, and I only see my asshole father every 2 weeks. I should probably start with my mother, and she is such a stuck-up person. She constantly nags people in the house when something isn't going her way. Every other day or so she talks about how nobody does anything around the house, which is ironic seeing as how we do weekly chores. And to make matters worse, she has an incredibly short temper. It leads up to her raising her voice and yelling at everyone around her no matter who she's talking to or how she's talking to them, even if it's to a random person over the phone. And when she gets like that, she refuses to see anyone else's point of view on a situation. Like she's obsessed with proving that no matter what somebody else says, she's right. And another thing about her that really bothers me is how she goes on all of these long-winded speeches about how I need to learn to be more social and how I have to make sure that I'll be able to provide for myself when I grow up, when she really acts like she wants to monitor my existence. Yes, I spend a lot of time listening to music, playing video games, watching cartoons, and navigating the internet, but at least I don't pester people. I don't tell them that they need to do something constructive with their existence when all I'm doing is sitting in a basement, smoking cancer-inducing cigarettes and playing Facebook Bingo and Candy Crush Saga on my touchpad. And I certainly don't need to hear stories about how she had problems with Grandpa being a loud person when she herself is a loud person. And that's what makes her a hypocrite. She usually complains about how Grandpa wasn't a good parent, and yet she's constantly taking after one of his worst traits. And she blows money away by constantly spending it on lottery tickets and scratcher tickets despite that she's been failing at it for decades. You know what those thousands, maybe tens of thousands of dollars would have been better spent on? Dentist appointments, so that her children can afford braces for their crowded teeth. Remember when my laptop was busted and I had to use my mom's computer for 2 months? It doesn't load very well, and whenever it's not loading at a preferred speed, she acts like I did something to the computer, a computer that she barely even uses, thinking that whatever I'm doing is causing viruses to download onto the machine. The same websites that I've gone to on my mom's desktop are the same ones that I've been going to on my laptop, and so far it's been doing fine. There are times when she has gotten so angry that she starts throwing things across the room. Like this one time she grabbed a phone and she threw it near my foot, and I don't remember her feeling that bad about it. And of course, there's those completely tired and cliched speeches that she spews about how nobody appreciates what she does, how her life is miserable, how she just wants to live by herself, and she has made so many bad choices. And several of them have resulted in things getting worse for me. She thinks I need to go to a life program, and everyone in that life program treated me like shit. She thinks I need to sign up for a singing class that I didn't need, and I felt paranoid about singing with a choir. She decides to marry a self-centered Mexican, and it results in our family spiraling out of control. Sometimes I just wish that Mom would stop being so obsessive for 1 week. Just 1 week. So that I don't develop thoughts about wanting to live somewhere else by myself. Not because it's a part of growing up, but because there are times that I just don't feel comfortable living here. Though, you know what? I just can't fully blame my mother for having become this so short-tempered all the time, because she's actually been through a lot. She had to put up with a bullshit school, a bunch of bullshit court lawsuits with the school. She has had to deal with problems relating to my sister and my dad and my stepdad for years. And the most recent problems that we've been having with Robert, they didn't even have to happen. From the moment Bob first started living with us, up until his juvenile son just decided to leave us, he actually seemed like a reasonable person. We went on vacations, we did family outings, we did things together, we did activities that we've been missing out on since Dad left. I thought of him as the replacement father that we needed. Like he was the man of the house who did things to keep everybody together. Ever since his son left, he has done none of those things. And he ended up developing this ridiculously selfish attitude. He gets into all sorts of arguments with both Mom and Miranda over so many stupid things. It unsettles everybody in the house, and it just gets to so many uncomfortable levels. It's easy to tell that he became less interested after his son left, and I know that because he drinks a lot. I once overheard Mom complaining to Grandma about how he spends $120 a month at the bar, maybe a week. He goes out to mess with his friends, he drinks with them, and he usually comes back home starting an argument with Mom. And it ends up ruining things too. Sometimes we go to a baseball game and he drinks a lot there. He's gotten into ridiculous fights with Mom several times before and during our time at the stadium. One time he fought with her near the end of a game, and I heard her calling her a fucking bitch. It really just goes against their relationship that he would say something like that about her out of nowhere. It's also a problem when he blames Miranda for stuff that happens whenever he's aggravated by something she does. He blames her for something and it immediately results in an argument between him and Mom. And when he gets angry, he just aimlessly screams at things. He gets so short-fused, he just storms out of the room, and he just screams at the top of his lungs when he's by himself. It really scares the dogs into going upstairs because they don't like the loud noises that accompany his screaming. It's become so repetitive and common that even Miranda has gotten sick of it. One time he started screaming at Mom so relentlessly that she went up to him and said, "Don't talk to my mom like that." It just got so out of hand that I was feeling very, very uncomfortable about it. That his constant yelling was causing all of this bad nature. Mom nearly called the police that time. What makes this all even worse is that I honestly can't remember the last time he gave his son or any of his family a phone call. If he's really that upset about Josh leaving, why hasn't he ever tried to call him? It just comes across as an incredibly poor display that this guy, who at first seemed like a good influence on our household, ended up becoming such an uncomfortable individual. He is an argumentative, non-negotiable, self-entitled redneck who drinks way too much and doesn't care enough about his own kids to give them a phone call. Mom has actually speculated the idea of moving out of this house and leaving him here. Just me, Miranda, and her all over again. That is how badly Bob started to care less. And do you know what really makes it sad? Is that there are times when he was actually in the right to complain about something that Miranda did. And that's not counting stuff that happened between us. To say that me and my sister don't get along very well is an understatement. Ever since Mom and Dad got divorced, she has treated me like she hates me. She says hurtful things to me constantly and hardly apologizes for any of it. She doesn't even show a sign of regret for anything she does. She calls me names, she tells me to shut up whenever I say something that she doesn't approve of, even if it has nothing to do with her. She gives me these dirty looks, these hateful glares whenever she feels negative about my presence. And she tends to act like she's an authority over me, telling me what I can and can't do, like she's my mother. After an argument, when I try to talk to her, she intentionally ignores me. I try to be reasonable, and she walks out of the room. She covers her ears and pretends that I don't exist. And she has a pretty good history of physically harming me. Years ago, when we were doing an arts and crafts project and we got into a fight, she stabbed me in the arm with a pencil. The scar is still there, like this little gray dot on my arm. One time when Josh was still living with us and I was trying to talk to her after she lost her temper, she slammed a door on my thumb. It took 2 weeks for the nail to grow back and the thumb to fully heal itself. It doesn't even have to involve physical harm because she's still done horrible things to me. There was this time when I was looking through the cupboard in this small little room, and for absolutely no reason, she slammed the door on me from behind. There was no light in the room, and I couldn't open the door, and the cupboard was already small. I was beginning to feel claustrophobic, and I was getting horrified. By the time Mom finally opened the door, I was already screaming and crying, and I ran towards my room. I was that scared. And then there was this one time while I was trying to do my weekly chore, which was vacuuming the living room, she called me a fucking idiot just because she couldn't hear her program. Hell, at one point, she accused me of being sexist. Just a few months ago, we were visiting Grandma, and she and Miranda got into this long, argumentative conversation. And after the whole thing, Grandma asked me what did I learn from all this, and all I said was, I learned that women like to talk about their problems. You know, I said it jokingly, and Grandma understood that it was a joke, and she even admitted that to an extent, it's true. I guess because she can't take a joke, Miranda accused me of being sexist for that remark. And this is coming from someone who listens to black music about niggers and hoes having sex every time she gets into her car? Then again, ever since she started taking that woman's history class or whatever it's called, she's become somewhat of a social justice warrior, which, considering my past experiences with them, doesn't encourage good behavior. Now, just let me take all of that off of your mind for a second, because I just want to say that it's not like I'm any better than she is. Admittedly, I'm not the best sibling in the world. I've made hasty decisions that have resulted in horrible consequences. I get easily annoyed myself. I haven't made a lot of time to socialize with my family. I can be forgetful and simple-minded, and I end up not doing something that I was told because I forgot about it. I can name several times when I hurt my sister, like there was this one time when I pushed her too hard while we were playing tag and she hit her head against the chimney. I was immediately struck with guilt and grief, and I immediately shouted, "What have I done?" And even if it was something that happened a long time ago, I still feel bad about it because I hurt my sister and she didn't do anything to deserve it at the time. Admittedly, I've gotten used to a lot of Miranda's bad behavior, but that doesn't change the fact that it's horrible behavior. And when she's not going into political correctness speeches about what she thinks is wrong with the community, she is being disrespectful to her family. She is ignorant towards Mom, she says horrible things about Dad behind his back, and for someone who wouldn't shut up about wanting a dog, she hardly spends time with either of them anymore. There is no way in shit that any employer on this planet would give her a job if they saw the way she acted, no matter how much better she's done than me in college. If we lived in the Middle East, she would be in jail 6 times over. But you know what? I could forgive all of it, if she wasn't such a jerk. And that's the bottom line of this whole bit. My sister is just a whiny, hurtful, self-pitying jerk. And you know what? Despite that she does tend to say bad things about Dad behind his back, it's practically warranted because he has done so many horrible things. No matter what I've said about Mom or Miranda or Robert up to this point, none of it is compared to the shit that my father, Francisco Pancho Diaz, has pulled off. I've already talked about how badly he's treated Mom and how he babied Miranda so badly that I felt inferior to her, and I've still got so much to get off of my chest regarding that man. He is completely selfish and irresponsible as a father. He has no patience, he constantly overreacts to everything, he doesn't even allow anyone to make a plan or go through with something the way that it was planned. He just acts upon whatever he thinks is going to benefit him whenever he wants to do it, regardless of how it affects somebody else. He is always shouting, always screaming, always getting short-tempered over the most ridiculous things. It's pretty easy to believe that his horrible attitude rubbed off onto Miranda so badly, and because she doesn't even care to see him anymore, it means that I have to put up with it more. He has called me stupid, crazy, idiot, and a moron. So many times he has come across as pointlessly spiteful and aggressive. And it's not even just me, he's aggressive with everyone. He shouts at Mom, he shouts at Miranda, he shouts at anyone he gets into a disagreement with. And even in later years, he's still getting into arguments with Mom over stupid shit, even if it's something as trivial as information on a dental card. He started screaming at Miranda and Victoria this one weekend just because somebody put the wrong dish on the wrong side of the sink. And the worst part about that is that he allowed the aggravation he had towards someone else to rub onto me. Because she did something wrong, he started screaming at me over something like the chairs not being scooted into the table even if nobody was using them. And he did that despite that I had nothing to do with anything that Miranda or Victoria did. He has physically struck me so many times over the years. He has punched me, kicked me, slapped me across the head, slapped me upside my shoulder and arm. He's done it so much that if he gets upset with me nowadays, it wouldn't even come across as surprising or shocking, or it would just be expected of him. And this is all for no purpose, for no greater good than to discipline me or teach me a lesson in a way that he thinks is appropriate. The really bad experiences that I've had with him are too many to count. When I misunderstood a pizza order, he got angry with me and struck me. When we were finished eating at this Italian restaurant that he chose for dinner, he got short-tempered with me because he didn't like their food. When I tried trimming some hair that was growing over my eyes because it was annoying me, immediately when I got into the car, he got angry with me and struck me because I'm not good at giving myself a haircut. When my cousin Victoria misplaced a DVD at his apartment, he accused me of losing it and spent the next 10 minutes screaming at me over it. When I got some extra silverware at the old country buffet while it was still open, he got angry with me just because I got some extra silverware that he didn't think we needed. When I had trouble putting this garbage bag over his garbage can, he started yelling at me as if I was too stupid to do it myself. One time when we were visiting Safari Zone and some shitbag stole my power card, he blamed me for not being more protective of it and started yelling at me over it. When I accidentally ripped a hole in my shirt, he got aggravated with me because he figured I had nothing else to wear to my cousin's wedding reception. One time when we went to church for midnight mass on Christmas Eve, he got upset with me just because I used the wrong hand to shake other people's hands. So basically, even on Christmas Day, he still felt the urge to be a dick to me. When we got confused with our dinner plans involving Miranda changing her mind and wanting to eat at Wingstop, he got pissed with me because I changed my own mind on what I wanted to eat and insisted that I eat fish. And just recently, on New Year's Day, when his internet wasn't working, I was trying to figure out why it wasn't working, so at the same time when he walked into the room when I was practicing refreshing the page, he accused me of trying to hide something from him. He accused me of bullshitting him and spent the next 10 minutes screaming at me. When we went to see Harry Potter Part 7 at the movies, I accidentally walked into the wrong theater, and when I shouted "come on" at my expense of accidentally walking into the wrong theater, he suddenly appeared behind me, and then he hit me because he thought I was acting crazy. When we went to see the Avengers with my uncle and his family, me and Miranda got into a fight, and he hit me telling me to shut up. He never even addressed Miranda's side of the argument, he was just focusing on me. This year when we went to watch Creed, I was eating my popcorn and he was telling me to be quiet. I tried to tell him that I was just eating popcorn and he told me to shut the fuck up. He told me to shut the fuck up because I was eating popcorn that he knows that we enjoy sharing whenever we go to see a movie in the last 10 years that we've been going to the theaters. It really amazes me how I can't even eat something anymore without pissing him off. The worst thing about all of this is that half of that stuff happened after I gave him a second chance. Basically, one weekend me and Miranda were finally fed up with him, and we both told him that we didn't want to visit him anymore, and we practically didn't see him for 2 whole months. We just stayed at home with Mom, where she would occasionally argue with Dad over the phone. At the time, I was filled with so much resentment towards that man that I no longer wanted to have anything to do with him. But, like the fool that I was, after I finished venting, I figured that I'd might as well give him a second chance. So I found it in myself to type out this letter telling Dad that I was willing to forgive him if he would improve his attitude and his influence as a parent. It was almost 4 years ago, considering the release date of The Avengers, so this isn't something that happened too long ago. I thought about what I wanted to tell my dad, I typed it into words, I printed out the letter, and one weekend when he finally decided to come over, I went to him with that letter, and I read it to him exactly as I typed it out. And if you think that at any point in this video I have exaggerated anything that I said about him, or Miranda, or anyone else that I've talked about so far, I have here the exact letter that I showed him 4 years ago, signed with my name on it in red ink. These are the exact words that I typed, hoping that my father deserved a second chance. Okay? Here it goes. Dad, while we waited for you to arrive, I've been preparing this speech for you. It's about how our relationship is working out. Needless to say, it's not very good. Weeks ago, we spent some time together with Uncle Bob and Victoria. We celebrated Cinco de Mayo and we watched The Avengers. It felt like it was going to be a nice weekend, and then, in the last 20 minutes, it was ruined. You started yelling at us over little things and things that should have been discussed earlier. But you waited until the last minute to yell at me and Miranda about it. And it set off the balance of the time we spent together. I don't want to have to do this to you, but it must be done if I want to have a stronger relationship with you. For 15 years since the divorce, our relationship has been a heavy hit and miss. However, as we got older, it felt as if we were spending less time with you. Nowadays, we sit in a small apartment building, watching movies or limited cable, as you sit in your room, talking to people on the phone. I'm not gonna lie, the time we went to Disney World and the time we went on that cruise were some of the best things to ever happen to us. But those were things that we did only once every 2 to 3 years. Out of the 365 days there are in a year, we might spend 30 of them with you. For each visit, we see you for a total of 26 hours, and 8 of those hours we spend sleeping. In the 18 hours we spend with you for each visit, it seems as if we do nothing together, and we spend the whole day in a small apartment. I'd like to do some stuff with you, like going golfing or watching a movie, but it just looks like you don't feel interested in doing those things. When you have your angry outbursts, I try not to say anything because I thought you would react in a manner that isn't comfortable. When I make these little mistakes, you might sometimes have a critical reaction to it. In my mind, I feel as if every time I go to visit you, I risk doing something that may upset you. The last time we visited you, Mom saw us coming home with tears, and I didn't think it was possible, but on that same day, I realized that Miranda takes it worse than I do. She doesn't want to sit in an apartment all the time either, and I don't want to say these things about you because you're my dad. I just want us to love each other, not get into fights all the time. But when the time comes that you have your outbursts, it makes me have second thoughts about the time that I spend with you. Mom told me that she had a similar relationship with Grandpa, a relationship that resulted in the two of them not talking to each other much anymore. I don't want to think that, but I'm afraid the same thing will happen to us. Just today, Miranda said that she wants to stay home this week because it's a nice day out, and she feels like she wants to do something instead of just sitting around in a small apartment. If we just got out of the apartment more often, it would feel as if we're doing something. But no one seems to suggest anything, and it makes us all feel bored. So, for the 20 minutes I spent typing this speech, it must come down to this very moment. I cannot be with you if you are unable to understand the nature of this situation. Dad, the way you react to what I have to say today could decide the relationship I have with you from now on. I love you, but you need to decide. Are you the father you think you are, or are you the father I believe you can be? That is the exact letter that I typed to him, hoping that it would improve our relationship. And just recently, last month, he told me to shut the fuck up and accused me of bullshitting him. It really meant a lot to me that after I was being so selfish and unforgiving of him that I believed that there was still another chance for the two of us to have a better relationship after I was finished venting out my frustration. I truly believed that if I could go to him with that letter and calmly explain things to him, that he would be a reasonable person. I find it disgusting and ignorant that after all these years, he still has this horrible attitude and he has refused to improve on it. He acts as if I never wrote that letter in the first place, a letter that I wrote for him from the bottom of my heart. If anything, he's completely forgotten that I wrote that letter at all. Every once in a while, I would tell my mom about how I had a bad time while I was trying to interact with Dad, and she has always told me that I don't have to spend time with him if he's going to keep treating me like this. At this point, I'm keeping up these every 2 weeks visits with him out of pity because without me, he's literally got nothing anymore. Mom doesn't care, Miranda doesn't give a shit about him anymore, Bob doesn't know him enough to give a shit. He's antisocial to the point that he doesn't feel fully comfortable with spending time with his own family, including his own brother, his sister-in-law, and his nieces and nephews. Without me, all he would have is this incredibly small apartment, which, considering that he lives in an apartment with all of these other people living around him, you think that at some point someone would have called the police on him for overhearing his domestic disturbance. Almost 24 years I've been associated with this guy, and he still has this horrendous attitude. He ignores Miranda's phone calls. He's done things to Miranda that, despite our dysfunctional relationship, I don't feel like she deserved to be disrespected by her own father. One time, Mom told me about the time that I was sitting on this high chair and I was playing with a lighter and he was just allowing me to play with the lighter before Grandma figured out what was going on. Grandma got so pissed with my dad and she immediately took the lighter away from me because you don't trust kids with lighters. You don't let them play with something like that. In fact, one of the reasons why Mom never got a job was because she couldn't trust Dad to look over her kids. Letting your son play with a flammable object, leaving your 5-month-old daughter alone in an apartment at night just because you wanted to get some Valentine's gifts? How do you trust a person like that to look over your kids? Everything is his fault. He is the reason the family became so dysfunctional. All of the problems that started with this dysfunctional family happened immediately after he left us, after all the times he mistreated my mother and myself. And aside from the fact that he was a horrible husband to my mother, and that he just hasn't been a good father to me or my sister, he is an infuriating, impatient, unreasonable, aggressive, provoking, violent, self-centered, inconsiderate, domestic, and all-around pathetic excuse for a person. And honestly, on the day he dies, I don't think I would want to go to his funeral. So, at this point, you've probably guessed that I have a very troubled history and relationship with my family, and it gives the strong vibe that I don't really like them very much. But despite all that, I can't really bring myself to say that I hate my mother or my sister or Robert. I mean, I still remember all of those fun times that we've had, and I remember some of the more recent good times that we've had, and I think about all of the nice things that we can still do in the future. I know that they must love me, but it's just that all of those bad memories and how they just stay in my head, it just gives me this compulsive impression that they're not good at showing it. I want to love Mom and Miranda and Bob. It's just, that's kind of what it's like being me, with my ability to remember memories from a long time ago, and some of them having a longer lasting impact than I thought. I just keep remembering all of these bad experiences that I've had with my family and the relationship problems that Miranda, Mom, and Bob and Dad have had with each other. I still remember it like it was yesterday that we actually had this outing over at Washington, D.C. We traveled to the other side of the country. I took pictures of it, and I came back with this giant bar of chocolate. It was a Hershey's bar from New York, and it was such a great vacation that we shared. Just the four of us. I keep remembering all of the nice times that I've had with Miranda, Mom, and Bob, and my two dogs, and I just wish that things would go back to the way they used to be. Boy, this, this one went on for a very, very long time. Okay, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. You wasted enough listening to me ramble on my family. So until next time, remember to take care of yourselves. MisAnthro Pony, over and out.